I am quite familiar with the literature of the OSS, as you can well imagine, and obviously with the literature of Bill Casey's life. But enough of that talk has never been published before that I'm going to urge both the IWP Press and the OSS Society to publish it in their newsletters and their publications. Our next part of Bill Casey's public life, as you know, he went into private life, practiced law in New York, and I got to know him then. He was a publisher, did a lot of writing, and I was part of that life. But we're looking here at his public life. And the next phase of his public life was he was asked by President Nixon to become chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And at that position, he met a fellow who became known as the enforcer of Wall Street. The tough cop on Wall Street is the expression that was used. When Bill left public life and then went back in 1980 as Director of Central Intelligence, he asked that tough cop to go with him as General Counsel of the CIA. Of course, I'm talking about Judge Stanley Sporkin. Subsequently, he became a district court judge, and now he's, some people say he's retired. I don't think he's retired. He's still very active. He's no longer on the bench. He's coming up here right now, and I don't see any black robes on him, so I guess he's not going to play that role. But Judge Stanley Sporkin is going to talk about Bill's role at the SEC and also, I think, relates to his role at the agency too. The agency that doesn't exist. I was just out in San Diego, and somebody told me, "Oh, there is no such agency." But I was with the people who build the drones. Okay, thank you, Judge. You want to sit down?
Yeah, no, I'll be all right. God, what a pleasure this is. After hearing that wonderful talk, and to sort of fit it in with my background with him, I'm so pleased and proud to be here to celebrate Bill's 100th birthday. He was, as Bernadette said, a wonderful human being. In my estimation, there was really nobody like him. First, he was the smartest individual I have ever known. He had a photographic memory. He was a voracious reader, and as was pointed out, after reading 2 to 3 books an evening, he would, and after doing all his other work, he would still find time to do that. When I used to travel with him, we would go to play. One time I was with him in Canada, and first thing he did was go to the bookstore, pick up all the books. We were in Quebec City, and he wanted to fight the battle of the Plains of Abraham, and we had to go to the local diorama and see whether he was right in where how the battle was won. But I got to know Bill when President Nixon appointed him the chairman. Among the career staff at the SEC, there was always a great deal of anxiety when a new chairman came aboard. The staff fears were in no way diminished when Bill moved in with his kitchen cabinet, a dozen or so very bright and eager assistants, including Ted Rowe, who is here today. Those folks took over every phase of the commission. This was the way, now we know why Bill was, how he used to fight wars. He just took over the whole commission. But he soon learned that he might have made a miscalculation in underestimating the capability of the career staff. He was a fast learner and quite facile. He saw there were members of the staff who were willing to carry out his plans, and to work with him. And he was looking for people. You had to understand that he was a person that was a tremendous decision maker, and he always looked for people. I didn't realize that I was one of those folks that could do it, but he saw something in me, and therefore he and I got along together. But there's one incident that Bill found quite amusing at the SEC. We had sued Sharon Steele for misusing employees' pension funds. After settling the case, Bill called me one afternoon to report the following incident. He said that he was just visited in his office by I.W. Abel, the much feared president of the Steelworkers Union, who Bill said asked him what kind of Republican trick was he pulling off to win over the hearts and minds of the steelworkers. He couldn't believe that the Republicans would do something like that. After sharing with me Abel's remarks, Bill confessed that he and Abel were good friends and that Abel was truly appreciative of the work that Bill had done in protecting those steelworkers. Even though Bill was only at the SEC a short time, he made remarkable changes. One of the important steps he took was enlisting the aid of the well-known New York attorney Jack Wells to look at certain of the SEC's enforcement practices. Out of the study came the so-called Wells letter, which requires the SEC staff to advise persons under investigation that the staff was about to recommend proceedings against them and to provide them with an opportunity to respond so that the commission would have their views when they took action. Over the years, this procedure, any in the audience know about this procedure in the practice of in their legal practices? I don't see too many hands, but that is really a very important change that was made, and now has been picked up by other agencies, and it's become a fairly famous thing. We should call it the Casey rather than the Wells letter, but it came out of Bill Casey's work. The trepidation I had from my first meeting with Bill had fully disappeared during our time at the SEC. I greatly missed him when he left the commission to become Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs and later chairman of the Export-Import Bank. He asked me to join him at the bank, but I decided it was not the right time for me to leave the SEC. Looking back, I believe that was Bill was hurt by that, and because we had really bonded, and now when you look back, you sometimes are sorry that certain moves you didn't make. I heard nothing from Bill for a number of years. When Henry Kissinger became Secretary of State, Bill left his post at State to lead the Export-Import Bank. Can you imagine those sessions at the State Department between Henry and Bill? How Henry, you couldn't understand him, and Bill sometimes had a language of his own. And how they would communicate would be very difficult, so I guess that's why Bill had to leave and go somewhere else. And he left the government when the Carter administration came in. I thought of Bill a great deal during that time. I followed his career from the press reports, and I was pleasantly surprised when the former governor of California appointed Bill to lead his presidential campaign after the governor had lost the Iowa primary. I later learned that the defeat was not only a negative result that came out of that loss. The campaign had serious financial problems. So Bill, as he started to lead the campaign, was faced with some very serious challenges. When Reagan was elected, Bill was extremely proud of his contributions both at the primary and the general election stages. And during this entire period, I heard little from Bill until one day I received a curt message that he wanted to see me at his temporary residence at the Jefferson Hotel. I met with Bill and Sophia in his suite. We had drinks, and in Bill's typical direct manner said, "Stan, even though you turned me down at the Exim job, I'm going to ask you one more time to work with me. I want you to be general counsel of the CIA." He told me to take my time and to talk it over with my wife and to get back to him as soon as possible. Knowing how decisive Bill was, I hesitated for only a moment, and I said, "You got your man." I just wanted so badly to work with him again, so I had to accept the consequences if there were any. Even Bill was surprised by my quick decision. We had some further small talk and I left. He had told me during that discussion that the reason he had not talked to me for so long was that he didn't want me to get involved into politics, and because he knew I was a civil servant, and show you that's how ethical Bill was. That evening at home, I convened a small family gathering to tell them about my meeting with Bill and his offer. I was afraid to tell them that I had already accepted it until I had received their approval. My wife Judy is here today, liked the idea since she was a big fan of spy novels. My son Dan, who is also here today, simply said, "You are certainly going to change the image of what a spy is supposed to look like." For several months, I heard nothing further about the offer and was quite perplexed. I didn't know whether Bill had forgotten about me, and so I just bided my time at the SEC to bring my 20-year tenure there to a close. What happened next will show you Bill's OSS skills. Several months after my meeting with Bill, I was attending a funeral service for a prominent D.C. lawyer who was also Bill's friend. I was there with another SEC staff member, and as we were leaving the church and walking to my colleague's car, I was tapped on the shoulder by someone who said, "The boss wants to see you." Bill had also been attending the funeral and was getting in his car at the time. My friend was startled when he saw me going with this individual who took me to Bill's car. When I saw Bill, he told me to get in the car. I told my friend that everything was all right and that I was not being kidnapped. And I explained to him later. We drove to the CIA headquarters at Langley, at which point, with few words, Bill turned me over, that's the way he used to operate, to the head of CIA personnel, with Harry Fitzwater, with a crisp message to get me processed as soon as possible. In Harry Fitzwater's office, I kid you not, he asked me what job had Bill promised me. I could have run the agency. So after a background check, a psychiatric examination, and a polygraph test, I didn't know all this was going to happen. I was ushered in at the CIA's fifth general counsel. I was a fish out of water. I knew nothing about spying. Indeed, one of the questions a psychiatrist asked me was, why did I want to work for the CIA? When I answered, I had no interest in working for the CIO, and that I only wanted to be with my old friend Bill Casey. I thought I had flunked the exam. As my tenure as general counsel began, I was not well received by my office. In effect, I was an outsider, and they kept me in isolation. I was told nothing, and nobody came to see me. Bill was too busy to spend time with me because he was doing a lot of other things. I soon realized it was up to me to learn on the job. Then one day, shortly after arriving at the CIA, I learned there was a God. One evening while I was at home, I got a call from someone who said his name was Max. My wife could see it was an unusual call, as she could only hear my part of the conversation. This fellow who called himself Max said he needed to see me right away. He said it was urgent. I asked him where we should meet. He said at his place. I asked where was his place, and he said it was near the place. It became clear to me that I was onto something, and that this was the way the spy business operated. I agreed to meet him at his place. As I was preparing to go, my wife said, "Don't go, it's a setup." She reminded me of the many spy novels that she had read and how naive I was since I knew nothing about spy operations. In those days, you could get by with not listening to your spouse and merely asking for forgiveness later. So off I went to meet this fellow named Max, whom I had not met before. At the meeting, I learned that Max was Max Ugel, who Bill had recently appointed to head the clandestine service. He was brought in from the outside world who, like me, had no prior spy experience. Max was extremely successful in business, and Bill thought he could be very helpful in running the clandestine service. Max told me his problem. He had been with Bill in Central America, getting ready to attend a meeting with the Contras, when Bill received word that Bob Woodward of the Washington Post was working on a story about Max and his stock dealings while he was in the private sector. Max said that Bill told him to immediately return to headquarters and contact me. Although I was not happy about Max's predicament, I said, wow, my first big case at the CIA was a securities case. Thank God. How did someone ever get that lucky? After being briefed by Max, I realized I had something I could sink my teeth into. Because Bill was in Central America, I was on my own. I called Woodward, whom I had known from my SEC days. He said he would fill me in, but only if I would bring Max to the Washington Post's offices. Since I did not represent Max, with his permission, I arranged for him to be represented by counsel. We went to the Post offices, and although not planned, we shortly found ourselves in a deposition-like setting with the Post reporters and a Post lawyer asking questions of Max, and my being able to get the information that I needed. After several hours of this Q&A, Ben Bradley, the Post executive editor-in-chief, barged into the room asking who turned the Washington Post into a court of law. He looked at me and said, "Sporkin, only someone like you could do this." He said the party was over, and he called the meeting to an end. On the way back to Langley, I realized that Max could not be saved and that he would have to resign. I drafted the resignation papers, and Brief and I had a big discussion, and after the discussion, he fully agreed with my assessment. Bill and I told Max that was in his interest because if he stayed on, he would be, subjected to congressional hearings and possible investigation by the Department of Justice, and that if he left, that thing would go away in a short period of time. It did act, the strategy worked. The unfortunate part that Max held it against Bill and me for doing what we did. The Ugel affair caused Bill a new set of problems. The people who didn't like him were not happy with Bill's decision to bring in someone from the outside to run the crown jewel department of the CIA. A campaign was mounted to undercut Bill. Information started to emerge about Bill's stock dealings. One Saturday morning, Bill came to my office at Langley to tell me that at noon there was going to be a press conference and they wanted me to be there and address the press. Because it was Saturday morning, I was wearing casual clothes. I had no coat or tie. I was on my way home to get it when Bill said, no, you have no time, and I would have to wear his jacket and tie. Now, everybody knew Bill's ties. He used to chew them. So I had to deal with that. But Bill was what, 6'4"? How tall was Bill?
6'2".
6'2". I'm 5'9". Okay. Can you imagine the way I look wearing his jacket with the sleeves coming down to my knees and and having to go before the press? But in any event, Bill's strategy worked. We were able to quiet the press by telling them there was no securities case against Bill. Here, once again, I was at the CIA dealing in a securities matter and not a national security matter. I had often thought that Bill selected me because he knew something that I didn't know, that they're going to have more securities problems than national security problem. He still had one big hurdle to overcome. The committee, the Intelligence Committee, was pressing Bill to put his stock holdings in a blind trust. The issue continued to come up time and time again. In my view, it could only be resolved by Bill placing his holdings in the blind trust. I prepared the papers and presented them to Bill for his signature. He resisted. He asked me whether he was legally required to do so. I said no, he was not legally required to do so. And I told him it was the only way we were going to silence his critics. It was the only time between Bill and I that we ever had any kind of a disagreement. Finally, I said to Bill that he had two choices: either put his holdings in a blind trust or accept my resignation. In typical Casey fashion, he took my pen and signed the trust paper saying, "Now you can leave." This ended the early skirmishes and allowed Bill to take charge of the agency and to do his magic. Our nation was faced with many difficult challenges. Bill had been working on the so-called Reagan Doctrine, which was to thwart communism in its tracks, which at that time was creeping up and taking over Central America. It was very close to home. Bill was convinced that up to that point in history, there had never been a reversal of communism once it had taken its foothold in a country. Thus, we were facing very serious threats in our own hemisphere. The administration wanted to turn back communism in Nicaragua, where it had taken a foothold. The CIA was working with the Contras. The Congress was willing to provide funds so long as the money was not being used to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. One of the goals for the legal department was to take it from a strictly, one of my goals was to take it from a strictly reactive group and turn it into a counseling group in part. I wanted to start advising the agency affirmatively about how to stay out of trouble. The so-called Bolin Amendment gave me that opportunity. It provided that no CIA funds could be spent for the purposes of overthrowing the Nicaraguan government. Accordingly, I had the staff prepare a paper that would counsel how the agency should proceed to keep it in line with the Bolin Amendment. The staff was somewhat comprehensive. It did not think it would go well with either Bill or the clandestine operators. I presented the paper to Bill, who in his own inimical way took the document and began to mark it up to make it a much more readable and more effective document. More important, when he had finished his editing, the document was in plain English and not legalese. If you know, Bill not only was a tremendous lawyer and brilliant and everything, but he was a tremendous writer. And he was just marvelous with words, and we had a very effective document. And he appreciated that. He thought that was a great idea, what we were doing. The day-to-day challenges involve things that I would never have imagined. Take, for example, where the CIA sued ABC Network at the FCC for violating the fairness doctrine in a particular case. Can you imagine it? One day we're talking, he said, well, what are we going to be able to do with this guy? The ABC came out with this crazy story which was false, and they would do nothing about it. And so we decided that we said, well, let's sue him. We said, well, how can the SEC sue somebody? I don't know. He said, sue him. So we figured out we'll sue him before the FCC because they weren't adhering to the fairness doctrine, which was to show a balanced approach. And it worked. We had a wonderful complaint, and other papers picked it up, and it brought great. They took it out on ABC. They criticized it tremendously for what they were doing. We were compatible. We were able to communicate. I don't know, many of you work with him, but when you get in sync with Bill, you can communicate without communicating with him. You just know it. He knows what to be doing. And that's the way it would be done. At times, the operators only wanted, when they presented you with an idea, all they wanted to know whether it was legal or not, and I was never going to buy into that concept, and Bill wasn't. And Bill said, no, I want your view as to whether it makes sense or not, and that's the way we used to deal with that, not on a strictly legal basis. If it was a bad idea, it was a bad idea. Now, and he always backed me up. There also came times when the staff believed Bill needed to receive a message on certain matters, which they did not believe they could give to him, and so they would come to me and say, you give him the bad news. And so that became part of my job. And I must emphasize that both at the SEC and the CIA, when Bill left those places, the respective staffs were extremely sorry to see him leave. He provided not only a tremendous management and ability and doing things, but it was an excitement. Can you imagine in bureaucratic Washington that somebody can be an exciting leader? And he did that. He just got everything working. The Iran-Contra affair was something I have not really touched on. We at the agency did what we had to do, I believe, by getting the president to make a finding. In my view, this protected all those involved in the operation, except for those that really didn't tell the whole story. If they had told the whole story, there would have been no problems because the president had bailed them out. When time came for me to leave the agency, Bill recommended me to the president to be a judge. For that, I will always be grateful. My nomination was not an easy one. One positive thing that it did do was to bring about a degree of bipartisanship. This I learned when Bill remarked to me one day that he received a call from Senator Ted Kennedy, who wanted to work with Bill to support my nomination. Can you imagine Bill and Ted, what a combination that was, and he liked it. He liked working with him. There was nothing better than working with Bill. To repeat, he was the smartest, the most decent man that I ever met. I had the good fortune to work with him not only once but twice. He taught me a great deal, particularly about decision making. He believed that making a decision is extremely important because not making a decision is in effect making a decision that might not always be the right one. And I think, Owen, you'll agree with me, that was one of his greatest views and legacies. And of course, Bill, I want to obviously thank you for all that you did for me and my family. And of course, I want to wish you a happy 100th birthday. And I want to thank Bernadette and Owen for this wonderful event, which it just is terrific. Thank you very much.